Hey guys, welcome back to our topics related to microservice and event-driven architecture. We are using Spring Cloud Stream with Apache Kafka. So let's take a look what we have done so far, guys. So we have our customer microservice, which exposes an operation to create customer. So when we receive a request in order to create a customer, we actually process the request and persist the data to a database table. And after that, we also are publishing the event to a Kafka topic. So far, so good, guys. This is what we call by dual writes. Dual writes is a situation when your application should write data into different destinations or system, which in our case are database and Apache Kafka. Okay, dual writes. So now let's suppose that we have an exception in our microservice. Let's suppose that this exception occurs actually after producing the event to Apache Kafka. Let's suppose in this line here. So what's gonna happen here is if we have an exception in our service in this method, okay, what's gonna happen here is that we are going to have a rollback transaction. So we are using transaction management, so Spring Data JPA, okay, will perform the rollback transaction for us because the save is transactional. So the question here is, what about the event that we have published? How can we deal with that? This kind of failure will result in inconsistent system. So we are going to have inconsistent system and it's bad, right? So the question here is, how can we deal with this kind of problems? So this is where I want to introduce you the outbox pattern or transactional outbox pattern. So transactional outbox pattern solve this kind of problems related to dual writes in case such as a transaction tries to update a database and then publish the event to a middleware system, in our case Apache Kafka, and then commit the transaction. So we are going to use the outbox pattern in order to guarantee that both database write and producing the event, okay, will occur successfully. So before diving deep into more details, okay, let's jump to our code in order to implement and understand how we can deal with dual writes, okay, by using outbox pattern, okay? So let's go. So guys, now that we are here on our IntelliJ, the first thing that you have to do in order to follow this tutorial, you just need to follow, for example, the Git branch feature contract test containers, okay? So let's just take a look here on our application. So we have here, right, our project structure. We have a controller, right? And this controller is receiving a request. This request is to create a customer. So we go here on our service and we have the implementation. So here on the line 39, okay, is the place that we are sending the events to Apache Kafka. So in order to implement the transactional outbox pattern, the first thing that we need to do is we need to create a table, a database table that will allow us to persist the event that we want to publish later, okay? So in that order, let's just go here on our domain. Actually, I don't know if it's in domain or infrastructure, but let's just put here. So we are going to call it by outbox message. So having here our outbox message as a class, okay? Now we need to start providing some properties in order to transform it as an entity. So the first thing that we are going to do is annotating it as entity. An entity needs also an ID. And let's just also annotate it with the correct Jakarta persistence. So now that we have our ID, now we need to start, for example, creating some properties that will allow us to implement this outbox pattern. So the first property maybe should be, for example, the event type itself. So having here the event type, the next thing we need also to provide the payload of this event. And also, for example, we need to provide a mean in order to mark the event sent already, right? So in that order, let's just provide here a new field. let's, for example, put it as a boolean, and let's put it at send, okay? And for now, let's just put a default value as false. So now let's just use here some Jakarta persistence annotations. For example, here we are going to specify the column. So the event type cannot be null, as well as the payload also cannot be null. So in case of payload, we need actually to persist the event as, for example, in our case, a test, a JSON, an Avro, the format that you are going to send, okay, to Kafka. Or maybe you can transform it later, but in our case, let's just put here the column definition as a text. Having it like that, now let's just add some constructors. So having here, for example, the Lombok, okay, we can also add here the default value, okay, in order to work better with Lombok. And also let's just add the all arts constructor. So, and maybe just in case of, for example, in order to make it more trackable, we can add here some, for example, creation date and last update. So if we want to delegate this responsibility of setting the creation date and last update to Spring JPA, we can just, for example, here, enable JPA auditing. So here in our class, we are going to configure with entity listers, and we are going to say that we are going to use the auditing entity listers. And now we just need to, for example, here, let's say annotate it with the correct, okay, Spring Data annotation. So now we have our outbox message. So the next thing that we are going to do, we are going here in our service, and actually we are going to replace this code, okay, with the outbox pattern. But before that, I think as we have here an entity, we need also a repository, right, in order to persist the outbox, not only to persist, but to manage the outbox message. So in that order, let's just create here. So we have here our repository. So in order to be a repository, let's just annotate it with the correct Spring Framework stereotype. And now let's just extend the JPA repository. So far so good, guys. Now let's go to our service and let's replace, okay, this logic here using the outbox pattern. So now here in our service, let's keep doing our stuff. For example, let's just delete, okay, this, yeah, let's just delete this. So now the first thing that we are going to do is, I think we can now start instantiating the outbox message in order to persist. So let's do it. So the ID, we need, for example, the first thing is to set the event type. So as we can see, in our application, we have different kind of events, right? So for example, if we take a look here, we have customer created and email changed. Of course, we could have more events, but for this example, we just want to play with 2 events. So in that order, for example, here, we can just say the event will be customer created. And let's also provide the payload, okay? So how we gonna provide the payload here? So how can we set the payload here, right? So let me just put it like this. And in order to provide the payload, if you remember, guys, the payload type here in our outbox message is a text, right? It can be, for example, a JSON or Avro, or even, for example, proto buffer. I don't know. You decide the way that we want to do it, okay? But in our case, we are going to persist it as a JSON. So in that order, let me just inject here the object mapper. So having here, right, the object mapper, which is from Jackson, right, dependency that Spring in our case, the Spring Boot provided for us when you use, for example, the Spring Web, right? So what we are going to do here, we are going to use the object mapper, and we are going to write our customer created event, right, as a let me just say, for example, as JSON, okay? And actually it's not the event that we need, okay? So we don't want to set the payload as the same type as the customer, right? Because the customer is our domain object and we don't want to expose it anywhere, right? So in that order, let's use the customer mapper that we have here, and let's map, okay, this customer created, okay, to a DTO. So now, having here the DTO, we can use this DTO as our payload, because this is the object that we want to expose, for example, outside of our domain logic. Of course, it's a service, okay, but in our case, let's just for example, serialize the customer DTO as JSON, okay? Let's call it by payload. So it's complaining because it's a checked exception. In that order, we can just use, for example, the long box sneaky throws, okay? And now let's use the payload here. So having it like that, the other fields, for example, the ID, last update, and so on, okay, they will be managed by the framework, okay? So let's just use here, build, okay? Now that we have here, right, our outbox message, the next thing that we are going to do, let me just, for example, set here, private final, okay, private final, in order to be inject. Remember that we are injecting using the Lombok required hours constructor, okay? We also need to inject here the outbox message repository. So having here the outbox message repository, now we can, for example, persist here our outbox message. So let me just give here, okay, a context. So first thing, we persist our domain object, okay, to a database, and then we also persist our outbox message. Someone can ask me, okay, now how we are going to send the event, right? Because we are trying to avoid the dual write, because we were writing into database, right, and to Kafka, and now we are just writing to database. So as we can see here, these, okay, these two saves, okay, will occur in the same transaction, okay? So if one fail, for example, both will have the rollback. Let's move to the next step, which is the way that we are going to publish the event, okay, to Apache Kafka. So in that order, let's just create here a new, let me just put here, okay, we have customer messaging here, we have our event and DTO. So I think we can create here a new component that will allow us to publish the messages, okay, from outbox message, right, from our table to Apache Kafka. So in that order, let's just create here a new component, a new class in this case. Let's call it by outbox message publisher, okay, because some people say event, some people say message, but the difference here is that a message is general purpose, let's say like that. So an event is a kind of message, is something that has happened in the past, right? Because we have different types of messages, for example, commands, events, and so on, okay? I think just command and event. So in that order, let's just go here. Let's annotate it with the correct Spring stereotype, say component. We also need the required R constructor from Lombok. And if we want to, for example, log something, we are going to use the self4j, okay? So now that we have here our message publisher, the first thing that we need to do is we are going to create, okay, a method which will deliver our message to Apache Kafka, okay? The implementation details we are going to see later. So now let's go, let's create our method. It will be, for example, the deliver, okay? Let's call it by deliver. And yeah, Now, the first thing that we are going to do, we need to go to our database in our table, and we need to find, okay, here the outbox message, right, using the repository. I think we also need here a getter. So in that order, let's go back here on our outbox message publisher. Let's inject the repository. So having here our repository, now we need to find, right? We need to find all messages that we have in our outbox message. So in that order, for example, we need to create here a new method, right? The method that will, for example, find one by one, or find a collection of messages, right, that we want to publish. In our case, for example, let's just create here a new method. Okay, this method will return, okay, for now will return a collection of outbox message, okay, and let's say, okay, find let's say top 10, okay, let's find top 10 by sent, and yeah, let's just, for example, here order by, yeah, let's say order by ID, okay, ask, and here we'll receive, for example, a boolean, okay, which will describe if the message has been sent or not, okay, and yeah, we are going to I think ask here is not required, but anyways, let's go back here, okay, not here, it should be on the message publisher. Okay, now let's use here our repository, and we are going to use our method, and of course we are going to look for messages that haven't been sent, okay, and for now let's just set it as for each, okay, and we are going to process each message, so let's just do it like that. So now we can get our outbox message. The first thing that we are going to get, okay, let's get the payload. So this is the payload, and as we are sending, right, the events to Apache Kafka using, for example, in our case the content type is JSON, I think we can send it like that, but in order to respect our contract, okay, we need to map this payload, okay, into a DTO that will represent our and later we are going to map it to our event. So in that order, let's just, for example, here inject also, for example, object mapper. Remember, the object mapper should be from Jackson, okay? So in that order, let's just use here object mapper, and now as we are reading, right, the object, so we are getting here a test, a JSON, and we want to map it, okay, to our object. So in that order, let's just use here the payload, and yeah, we are going to map it to customer DTO. Having here our customer DTO, yeah, I think we need now to publish the event. So in order to publish the event, we are going to use the Spring Cloud Stream. Let me see here, this one, yeah, we are going to use this one, okay, which is our this is the mean that we are using, okay, Spring Cloud Stream, in order to produce the event, okay. Now we can start creating our event. So let's just instance it here. Let's say customer created, okay. I'm just putting it in the past, okay, so you understand that it's an event, okay, customer created. So let's just take a look here. It's a record, okay, it's a Java 17 record, okay. If you are not using Java 17, so you can just, for example, use a common class. So it needs an ID. So how can we get the ID? I think we need to go back here on our service and say that, okay, here the customer DTO, okay, will have also an ID, okay. So if we go back here, we just need to set, for example, we just need to get the customer ID. So just like that. So going back here on our outbox message publisher, we can start enriching our customer event. So we are going to provide the ID. Let's just take a look here. It's needed an instant, okay. The time that event was created, So how can we get it? I think we have this information here on our outbox. Okay, so get creation date. Okay, so getting the creation date, we need to transform it as a let's say we need to transform it into an instant, right? So in that order, let's just use here the zone ID that off. In my case, I'm going to put the UTC. Okay, if you are, for example, in other part, just see what more convenient for you, and let's just put here to instance. Okay, and let's use, of course, this created at here, right? And then we need also the customer DTO. That's it. Let me just put it here. So getting the message payload, we transform payload, which is a string, into a DTO. So we create here the customer event. And now the next thing that we need to do is we just need to transform it, okay, into a message. So how can we do that? If you remember the last videos, we just used the message. I think it's the message builder, okay, with payload. Let's say the payload will be the customer, right? The customer created, and let's set some headers. Here the header name will be, for example, let's just put it like, which type is our event? Customer created. And also something nice that I can add in this tutorial, for those who don't know, okay, we can use the Kafka headers, the key, okay, and let's just, for example, say, okay, the key will be customer ID. So why do we need key here? Because if you understand Kafka, if you provide a Kafka header key, okay, all the messages, all the events with the same ID for this customer, okay, will go to the same partition. For now, let's just create here our customer created message like this. And now let's publish the event. Customer producer that try emit. So this is the way that we are publishing the event. So if you remember, guys, we have here the flag sent, right, in our outbox message. So we need a mean to say, okay, once we send the event, we want to set this property as true, because if we don't do anything like that, next time we are going to send the same event, right? So in that order, I like, for example, the rich domain. So that's why I'm just going to provide here, for example, let's provide here a method. Okay, let's just say delivered. Okay, and actually this method, okay, we just say, okay, this that sent, okay, will be true. Okay, so after, as we are using this, it's a for each, right? After we send, okay, this event, the next thing that we need to do, we just need to say, okay, now that we sent the event, okay, we need to say, okay, the event has been delivered. So it will mark, okay, the flag sent to true, right? So we need also to persist it, right? So in that order, in order to persist the change, I'm just going to use here at transactional. So the at transactional will actually persist the change, okay, will help. So the framework will do it for us, right? So this code is a mess, and we need to refactor this particular case, right? So in that order, let me just, for example, let me just copy all of these and let's refactor it. Let's extract to another method and let's call it by, for example, map to message, right? So this is very nice name because we are just mapping to message. Okay, let me just, for example, put here at final and here, so it's from IntelliJ. And next thing that we need to do, let me just remove here the throws because it's a checked exception. Let me just use here at sneaky throws, right? And here also, let's just, for example, return in line. So I think, yeah, it's more elegant this way, right? So if we take a look here, okay, we are just going to database, we are finding some outbox messages, then we map, right? We map to message, so we are getting this object that we have in database, and we are mapping to a message. And then when we have the message, right, we publish the message, and then we set, okay, the message has been delivered. So it's nice, okay, but we need, for example, a mean that will allow this function to be triggered, right? So for example, we can think something like we are going to pull the table, okay, database of course, every, for example, 2 seconds or 1 second, right? So in that order, let's just go here on our main class, right? And let's enable schedule. And now the next thing that we need to do is just, for example, here I can say, okay, let me put it here at the top, okay? Let's say that this function is a schedule function, right? And we are putting here the fixed delay, right? And we are just going to put here, for example, let's say 1 second, okay? So, for example, we are putting fixed delay because there is a difference between fixed delay and fixed rate, okay? So, you have to understand it. I think now we can start our application, and let's try to see if this implementation of the outbox pattern, okay, is working. So now let's run our application. And let's go to our Postman here, okay? And let's try to create a new customer. So we have created a customer, and we got here an exception, and it's saying that, okay, the key long, okay, the key long, let me see, yeah, the key, which is a long, okay, the customer ID, cannot be converted, okay, to a byte array. So we have many different ways to solve this problem. For example, we can go to application property and set serialization and deserialization. In order to just solve it quickly, I'm just going to convert, okay, this customer ID, okay, to byte array. Right? Okay, now let's restart our application. So now that we have here our application running, the next thing that we are going to do, let's just try to create a new customer. Okay, now let's check the AKHQ. Let's just go here and let's take a look here on our topic. Okay, 19 seconds. Okay, we have created a customer. Okay, so if we, for example, try to create a new one, let's create. Okay, now let's check here on our AKHQ. Yeah, we got the customer here. So now let's check in our database. Okay, let's take a look here on our outbox message. If we select for some records, okay, let's take a look here. Okay, now we can see here that we have, okay, we have here the 2 customers that we have created, okay, and the flag, okay, sent is true, right? Now coming back here on our presentation, we have implemented the transactional outbox pattern by just, for example, persisting our domain object to our database, right, to our table, and in the same transaction, okay, we persist, okay, the data that we want to publish to Kafka, okay, to another table, which is the outbox table. So remember, this will happen in the same transaction. So if one fails, both of them will fail, right? So this is very nice. So later we have created here another, let's say, component, okay, which is a scheduler, right? And once we have, for example, our schedule here, once we trigger, which in our case, I think we put it every second or every 2 seconds, right? So we read from outbox table, and then we publish the message to Apache Kafka, okay? So this is the first step that you have to follow in order to implement transactional outbox pattern, at least with this approach, okay? So guys, after, for example, sending the message to Apache Kafka, in our case, our Kafka broker. After sending the message to our Kafka broker, we have to update, right, the outbox table saying that, okay, this particular message that we have just delivered here has been sent, right? So we mark it as true. But what if once we want to mark it as true, like sent is true, we get a connection timeout or something like that? So what will happen here is we are going to send, in the next time that we are going to trigger here our cron, we are going to send the same message multiple times. So it will duplicate the message at the consumer side. So this is what we call at least once semantic. When we, for example, when we allow some, for example, message to be delivered more than once, okay, we call it that at least once. So we will deliver once, twice, and so on, okay? So at least we can think that no message will be lost. So we will deliver in Kafka. This is sure, okay? And also I want to tell you, when you think about at least once semantic, okay, the data duplication, okay, we should think, okay, at consumer side, the data duplication maybe is not a problem, okay, for our business case, okay? And for example, if you want to solve at the consumer side, okay, you can use the concept called by idempotent consumers. I will show you guys in the future videos how we can deal with at least once, which is the message that we are going to duplicate, okay, how we can solve it at the consumer side, how we can solve it using Kafka, okay, and so on, okay? So stay tuned in the next videos. So in order to close our video, I want to tell you guys that we have implemented the outbox pattern, okay, the transactional outbox pattern, using our custom implementation, okay? Sometimes it's good and sometimes it's bad, right? Because sometimes we can think, for example, that we are reinventing the wheel. So in that order, I want to show you guys, for example, instead of using the custom implementation, in the next video, we are going to use another concept which is called by change data capture. So we are going to use Kafka Connect, okay, and the Vision in our case, okay? Stay with us and we are going to see it in next video. So hope that you enjoy. Please don't forget to put some like, okay? If you are not subscribed yet, please subscribe and let's see in the next video. Bye bye.